My ex-boyfriend thinks I cheated on him when I didn't, and now he won't talk to me. I know I deserve all the hate for this, but I would really appreciate advice on how to fix this right now. I'm not asking for pity, just advice. I feel like what I've done is micro-cheated on my ex-boyfriend. I've really messed up, and I don't really know what to do right now. I, 23F, met my ex-boyfriend, 19M, who I will refer to as David, through Instagram. He reacted on one of my stories about cars since he's also really into them. This led us to start commenting on each other's posts and eventually chatting as friends. This went on for about a week or so, until one day, he asked if I wanted to stay on call and chat with him while he drove 2 hours to visit his parents, which he does every weekend ever since moving out. I agreed, and I honestly wish never did. Naturally, we engaged in small talk. He told me how he graduated high school early and had the chance to move out after getting a job opportunity in another city. We discovered we were from the same city and, surprisingly, even went to the same high school. We started listing off people we knew to see if we had any mutuals or connections, and unfortunately, we did. I say unfortunately because this was when I also discovered the fact that he was one of my former best friend's exes, whom I don't associate with anymore. This didn't really bother me because I wasn't interested in him and had no intentions of being in a relationship at that time. From what I've heard through my former best friend, he supposedly left her to be with her other friend. Of course, this made me question David a little bit, but I thought to myself, hey, people can change, and the past is the past. The more we talked, the more I started to build an attraction towards David. The first time we met up was when he asked me if I was doing anything for my birthday, which was coming up in a day or two. I had plans with my friends that day, so he asked if I wanted to go for a late night drive the night before, since he would be at his parents' for the weekend. For reference, I live about 30 minutes from his parents, and he lives about 2 hours from both me and his parents. Anyways, I agreed, and he came to pick me up around 10 p.m. We drove around like dumb teenagers and talked the whole night about each other, life, etc. We were parked when it struck midnight, and he pulled out a bouquet of flowers he had prepared from behind my seat. This was the first time I had ever received flowers from anybody before, so I was shocked to say the least. We hung out for another hour or two until he dropped me off and went home. Still, I wasn't into David yet, but I did like spending time with him a lot. We hung out practically every weekend after that, and as the weeks went by, I slowly grew an attraction towards him, and eventually we started dating after he asked me out a few times. I reluctantly agreed after the few times he asked me out because I felt really unsure about him, due to what I heard previously. I didn't want to end up being abandoned again, as my last 3 exes had either left and or cheated on me. I hadn't been in a relationship for a year up until this point because I wanted to focus on myself and have my own freedom after feeling so controlled by my last boyfriend. I didn't want to go through that trauma again. David is your typical, traditional, chivalrous type. He works 60 hours a week, making a decent income, especially for someone his age, would always open the door for me, buy me flowers every other week, pay for literally everything everywhere we went, etc. Despite his age, he was honestly the most mature and sweetest guy I've ever been with, let alone met. He would even drive 2 hours every night after work just to see me before returning to work the very next morning. Even after all of this, he always cleaned up my apartment every single time he came since I have 3 cats, and they always made a mess out of it. Because of this, I practically got to see him almost every weekday, so distance was never an really issue. Despite all of this, I still felt so unsure about the relationship, especially knowing he left my former best friend to be with another girl, which he also confirmed to be true. I know I was wrong and shouldn't have done this, but I went through his profile on Instagram before we started dating and noticed that all the girls he followed were so pretty. I wouldn't say I'm an insecure individual, but this definitely made me start to feel a little insecure, especially with the knowledge of knowing what he had done to my friend before. Although it did help when I checked again and noticed he practically removed all of them a week after we started dating. I went out drinking with friends one night, and after a while, I guess I accidentally opened one of his messages and left him on read. I was completely unaware of this and didn't see any of his calls either. I didn't get back to him until I got home and called him back, just to be bombarded with a ton of yelling and questioning about where I was or what I was doing. Being drunk and on my period, I got extremely defensive because I felt like I was being attacked for doing nothing wrong and ended up saying a lot of hurtful things to him that I won't repeat here. After our argument, he asked me for space and I agreed since we were going in circles and not getting anywhere. That same night, he drove 2 hours to drop me off flowers while I was asleep despite having work at 6 a.m. the same day. I was really happy waking up to this, but when I talked to my friends about it and they told me he was trying to lead me on a string and manipulate me, I didn't really believe them, but it was definitely a thought in the back of my head due to how my last relationship went. My ex-boyfriend was very controlling and never let me go out with anybody unless it was with him. He even made me share my location with him so he could monitor me at all times. Eventually, more and more arguments would occur with David, always about the same topic over and over again, me spending time with my friends. He didn't like the fact that I would go out with my friends every weekend and not spend time with him instead, despite us seeing each other every single weekday. He also didn't like the fact that all my friends were men, and I would go out one-on-one with them every time. All my friends were guys because I've never really gotten along with girls, and with my work environment being in the automotive industry, there aren't a lot of girls to interact or make friends with. David never wanted or asked me to cut any of my friends off. He just didn't like the idea of me spending time alone with them, one-on-one, and not in a group setting. We always went back and forth about this because my friend group were never available time to spend it together, so I would always hang out with each friend individually. It got to a point where we would just always be screaming at each other, not understanding or seeing one's perspective. Ever since my last breakup, I've had so much freedom not having to worry about spending time with who or when I wanted to, and I didn't want to lose that freedom, nor was I prepared to. I would ask my friends for advice, and they kept further pushing the idea that he was insecure, controlling, and manipulative, like my ex-boyfriend. I slowly started to believe them, and I wish I never listened to them. I knew my friends didn't like David, so I lied to them, telling them I had broken things off with him. I'm not very close with my family due to personal reasons, so naturally, my friends I've known since childhood practically were family to me. And when Thanksgiving was coming up, one of my friends, who I will refer to as Austin, had asked me if I wanted to spend Thanksgiving with him since he knew I didn't have any plans with my family. I told Austin I had plans with my friend Jen, which of course was a complete lie. This lie would eventually come back to screw me over, and eventually, partially being the reason why David left the relationship. Anyways, by the time Christmas came around, David and his family had already planned months in advance to go out of state to visit his grandparents. I had nobody to spend Christmas with since my parents never made any plans. Austin heard about how I didn't have any plans. Once again, he asked if I wanted to spend a few days with him, so I wouldn't have to spend Christmas alone. I agreed after I lied and asked David if he would be okay if I spent Christmas with a group of friends. Of course, David said yes because he too didn't want me to spend Christmas alone. Austin took me to a Christmas fair event on Christmas Eve, and on the day of Christmas, he taught me how to drive stick shift with his car, which was something I had always wanted to learn to do, but never had the chance to. Austin recorded videos of me from the passenger seat, and I stupidly posted them on my Instagram story. Of course, David saw them and texted me saying he wanted to talk. When we called, David made it really clear that if I couldn't respect his boundaries, he would leave, and I didn't want to lose him, but I also didn't want to lose any of my friends either, since they were practically my family and all I had, aside from David. So I lied saying there was another friend in the back seat, which the video didn't show. He didn't believe me at first, and once again, we were arguing and yelling at each other over it. Once more, it was another argument about me hanging out with my friends. This was when I started to feel like I was reliving my last relationship, and history was repeating itself. I just wanted a partner who was trusted me not to cheat on them, whether or not I was with my guy friends one-on-one. I never had an issue trusting my partner when they went out, and I wanted the same treatment. I started to grow more and more resentment towards David as the argument continued. After some time, we both cooled down, and David eventually apologized to me saying he didn't want us to argue again, especially not on Christmas Day. On the day David came back from his trip, I picked him up from the airport. As I was driving, David asked me, again, if I had any plans with my parents for New Year's, since I told him I didn't know yet when he had asked me the first time a month prior to this. I told him I was going to a party that my friends invited me to join, since they had asked the day before this, and my parents confirmed there was no plans for New Year's. I figured this would probably be the last New Year's I would be able to spend with my friends since I would be spending the rest with David, so I wanted to go. He just got all quiet and slept while we drove home to his parents' house. When we arrived, he woke up and I could visibly see there was something clearly bothering him, so I asked him to come inside since it was pouring rain and to tell what was wrong. He refused to go inside and blew up. He started to scream and shout at me. He said he had been constantly asking me if I had plans for New Year's. I kept telling him that I didn't know and was unsure until I knew whether or not my parents were going to make plans to celebrate it. Now all of a sudden, I'm telling him that I'm going to some party instead of spending New Year's with him, despite him constantly asking me if I had plans. I screamed back at him, explaining to him that it just came up and this would be the last New Year's I would be able to spend with my friends, but he just didn't listen. Another argument ensued, and of course, once again, it had to be about me spending time with friends. I truly started to feel like David was controlling and just didn't want me around my friends. Every single time I had ever want to spend time with my friends, it would somehow always end in an argument. We just went in circles, constantly yelling and shouting at each other, which felt like hours until he got out the car and calmed down. He walked to my side of the car to open the door and talk to me. He stopped yelling and expressed how New Year's is special to him, and he wanted me to come spend it with him and his family since we didn't get to spend Christmas together. Still, I was being stubborn and wanted to spend it with my friends. After all, New Year's was never a big deal to me anyways. After I had said this, He screamed so loudly and unintentionally slammed the car door on my leg. I was so scared and left in a hurry to go home. This would lead to my biggest regret. After a few minutes, I started to receive calls from David. I eventually picked up, and immediately, I knew he was driving after me. He was sobbing, begging me to turn my car around and talk things out with him. He kept on apologizing, saying he didn't mean to slam the door on my leg or hurt me. I wish I could go back in time and listen to him, but I was so scared at the time. All of a sudden, I hear a loud crash through the phony and the call ended. I immediately turned around to find him. I spotted his car and it was a complete wreck. Luckily, there were no other cars involved and he ended up on the highway shoulder, off the road. I kept knocking on his windows, screaming at him to open his door, but it wouldn't budge. I called his mom and she rushed to the scene. Neither of us could get the doors to open, but luckily when the police finally showed up, they managed to get the passenger door open. By some miracle, he was mostly uninjured, aside from whiplash and a few bruises. He spent some time talking to the police and we eventually got the car towed to a shop. I just cried in his arms for what felt like years. I kept apologizing to him, but he didn't say a single word to me. We all went back to his parents and his mom informed us to just rest up. We spent the whole night talking about so much. We started to share locations with each other to build trust. I was very hesitant on this due to my ex constantly using this against me, but I agreed nonetheless. He came to the understanding that my friends truly felt like family to me, and I came to understanding of how much New Year's meant to him, and so we came to the agreement that I would spend a couple hours at the party with my friends, but would spend the last hour before the countdown with him and his family. When New Year's finally came, things were going as planned. I went to the party with Austin and a few other friends. Austin would eventually get way too drunk and I practically babysat him. Before leaving for David's, I made sure somebody was going to take Austin home. While I was at David's, Austin called me. I stepped away to talk to him to make sure he had gotten home safely. He kept talking nonsense about how he wanted to go for a drive. I had to stay on call with him and convince him not to do so. Of course, David came looking for me and asked why I was constantly on my phone. I told him the situation and he got upset. We started to argue again. He was upset that all he asked for was for me to spend the last hour of New Year's before the countdown with him, and all I couldn't even do that. I understand where he was coming from, but I was worried about Austin. I know I'm not obligated to take care of him, but I wanted to make sure he was okay. Eventually, Austin went to bed, but this had practically ruined our night, once again, through an argument about my friends. All because I was worried about a drunk friend. This was the first time David learned Austin's name and asked a lot of questions about him. I told him that Austin was the one who taught me how to drive a manual the day of Christmas, invited me to the fair, and even invited me to the party too. David didn't like hearing this and asked me not to hang out with him anymore. This made me upset because I just wanted David to trust that I wasn't going to cheat on him. Yes, I've lied to him about who I was with, simply because I just wanted the freedom of being able to spend time with my friend. Sometime later, Austin asked me to go to an anime convention with him because he didn't want to go alone. I really wanted to go, and because David was too busy with work, I lied to David once again and asked him if it was okay for me to go with a group of friends. He said it was okay, and so I went. These kind of events would happen once in a while, as Austin is the most available out of all my friends. I was living a double life. My friends didn't know about David, and David didn't know about Austin. This went on for a while until one night, David decided to go through my phone while I was sleeping. He found, saw, and read everything. He found out that I lied to him when I said all my friends knew about him, how I lied to my friends saying we broke up, how I was living a double life, how I spent Christmas one-on-one with Austin when I told him it was with a group of friends, how I lied about the party being in a group when in reality I just went with Austin. He even went through all my photos and saw the pictures Austin and I took together at the Christmas fair. It all looked so horrible, but I never cheated on David and I never had feelings for Austin. He was truly just a friend I saw as my brother and spent time with. But I know to David, it seemed like I cheated. I woke up to extremely loud slam of my apartment's front door. David had left without saying a word. He wouldn't answer my calls or my texts. Eventually, he picked up and called me a cheater and hung up. He told his family about how I cheated on him. I tried explaining the situation to him so many times, but he didn't listen. I stopped trying to contact him, and when I thought it was all over, he contacted me a couple weeks later. He wanted to get back together. He wanted to hear what I had to say. We talked and we got back together after I explained that I didn't cheat on him. Still, he considered it cheating since I lied to him and that Austin was unaware about us still being together, but that he was still willing to make things work. I offered to cut off Austin, but he didn't want that. He just wanted me to start telling him the truth, but things just weren't the same. David would always accuse me of lying to him. He would always ask to send him screenshots of who I was texting or who was asking me to hang out. He told me it would take some time for him to rebuild his trust with me. I thought I could do it, but I realized I couldn't. It started to feel too similar to my previous relationships, and I knew we could never fix things, considering his whole family thinks I cheated on him. I broke up with David and he begged me to stay. He showed up at my apartment, begging me to rethink things and to talk to him. I couldn't open the door knowing the hurt I would feel seeing him in that state. Eventually, he left, and I received an extremely long, hateful text sent to me by his sister, which I fully deserved. I never responded to it, but I read it a lot. About a couple weeks ago, I got into a car accident. My parents were out of town, and I didn't have anybody else available to help me. For those that are wondering why I didn't just call Austin, well, we are no longer friends. He had asked me out, and I couldn't reciprocate his feelings, so we stopped talking. I called David because he told me if I ever needed him, no matter what, to call him and he would be there. So I did. But when he answered the call, he sounded so cold. I asked him if he could come pick me up, and he refused. We ended up talking that night and the following week, until he randomly blocked me. Now I can't get into contact with him. I think I'm ready to talk to him again, but I don't know how to approach it. Please help, give me advice. TLDR. My ex-boyfriend thinks I cheated on him and now he won't talk to me. Need advice on how to fix this mess.